Hi, I wanted to give a bit of an overview for our topic this week. We will be discussing the 5 kinds of composing and the types of knowledge, which is pretty foundational in our textbooks. But I also wanted to cover some information regarding composition standards, both from the Oklahoma academic standards that we use to teach students and from the National Council for Teachers of English standards that we use as teacher candidates to be evaluated on our content knowledge. So first, I want to talk about the 5 kinds of composing and the different types of knowledge. This comes from our textbook authors, Fredrickson, Smith, and Wilhelm, and they actually just presented in 2012 at the National Writing Project on this topic. So to get some background information, I have given you a couple of chapters from the textbook to review, but I also want you to hear from the authors themselves this definition of the 5 kinds of composing. Pretty much they have called it the writing process on steroids, but that every writing process you plan, you practice, you have a first draft, a final draft, and there is transference. And transference is definitely the key in writing. So as you watch this presentation, I want you to go to the Blackboard discussion board and also be actively and critically watching and answer these questions. They start off with kind of an essential question: what do students, or what do you, need to know in order to read and write narrative, informative, and argumentative text? I want you to consider the things that you need. What prior knowledge do you have? Then I've broken up the presentation into the 3 different types of writing modes or text types. So I want you to answer a narrative question, an informative question, and an argumentative question from the presentation. Finally, I want you to just list 5 takeaways that you had while you were watching. I have posted mine here. And in part of the presentation, they talk about the power of yet, which made me think of the Sesame Street video. So I just attached that here in case you need some fun entertainment to go along with it. But this concept will be foundational through all of our discussion boards, through all of our work. I do believe that writing is a process, and we will be looking at the teaching of writing and not just the assigning of writing. And so it's important that you understand these concepts as presented in the textbook. So there is some background information. I also wanted to give background information on composition standards. There is a standard saga in Oklahoma. If you remember, our book specifically is aligned to the Common Core state standards, but we need to know that Oklahoma is not Common Core. We repealed those in 2014, and we have currently adopted our new state standards. So a little bit of background, just for those of you who have not been following the saga. Student standards, that is what teachers teach. Those are the things that students should know and be able to do. So in 2010, our last adoption of PASS, those are the Priority Academic Student Skills. So we've been teaching with those since 2010. But we were working to implement new academic state standards, and those were called the Oklahoma Academic Standards, OAS. So those were the previous PASS standards combined with C3, and C3 stands for College Career Citizenship. Really, those standards were Common Core, just renamed. But as we were in that transition period starting in 2010, with expected implementation of Common Core in 2014, there was a lot of political debate, a lot of misinformation about Common Core, and eventually it was repealed in June of 2014, 2 months before we were expected to implement it in the classroom. So for me, as a classroom teacher at this time, I left the school year in May thinking that we were going to be teaching under the Common Core standards in August. Summer happened, they were repealed, And when we came back to school in August, we went back to just the 2010 pass. That gave us time to write and get legislative approval of our new standards. And that is something that I have been involved with as part of my advocacy, is promoting these standards, getting feedback from stakeholders. I brought some of our State Department representatives to NSU in order to really get some good feedback from stakeholders. So where we are now, we do have new Oklahoma academic standards for English language arts. These are the OAS for ELA. These standards were written and approved. They went under many drafts, just like the writing process, in 2016. And so they are being implemented right now with this school year in 2016. This is actually a really great time to review them, to look at them, and to see what we as teachers and what our students, or what we as students, need to know and be able to do in regard to composition. A little bit of additional background information on the new standards. I will post a link to this YouTube video from Josh Flores. He is the director of English language arts at the State Department. So if you are interested, this gives you a little bit more information about all of the standards. There are 8 standards. 1 is speaking and listening. 2 is the reading and writing process. 3 is critical reading and writing. 4 is vocabulary. 5 is language, that would be your grammar. 6 is research. 7 is multimodal literacy. And 8 is independent reading and writing. And these are recursive. Reading and writing is integrated. And so all of these standards have a reading component and a writing component. What we're going to focus on in this course is Standard 2, the reading and writing process, and Standard 3, critical reading and writing. So, to look at Standard 2, the reading and writing process, students, we are students and teachers, we will, in this course, use a variety of recursive reading and writing processes. We will read and comprehend complex text. We will write by developing and strengthening our writing, by engaging in a recursive process, and that includes the writing process: pre-writing, drafting, revising, editing, and publishing. And those 5 stages of the writing process align to the 5 stages that our textbook authors use for composing. So that's Standard 2. I've listed those right here. But looking specifically at 12th grade, the reading standards are up here. The writing standards are down here. These are our student learning outcomes for this course. These will be the things that we will be practicing in order to prepare ourselves as future teachers, or to just better improve our own process as a writer. Standard 3 is critical reading and writing, which simply means that we will be applying critical thinking to our reading and our writing. So, as students and future teachers, we will comprehend, interpret, evaluate, respond to a variety of text. We will also write for varied purposes in all modes, using fully developed ideas, strong organization, well-chosen words, fluent sentences, and appropriate voice. And a lot of times, these are called the 6 traits of writing. And I will talk about more of that when we talk about evaluation and assessment of writing. So Standard 3 is critical reading and writing. Your reading standards are here. But looking at the writing standards, they are delineated by mode or text type. So 12th grade, and all of the grades really, have a narrative component, an informative component, and an argumentative component. So Standard 3, writing, Substandard 1 is narrative, and that will be our first essay. The second one is informative, and that will be our second essay. And the third one is argumentative, and that will also be our essay. In addition, we will do an essay where we blend multiple modes together, And this was actually a big conversation I had with my former Advanced Comp for Teachers 2 class, because we talked about how much we teach these modes in isolation. And this was part of the NCTE article that you just read on having such a structure and format. But we need to be able to blend the modes based off our purpose and our audience. So everything we do is going to be aligned to these standards, and we are going to be following what is expected of our students and was expected of just good writers in general. So in talking just a little bit more about the blending of writing, I kind of thought about it as a paint wheel, in that you have your 3 primary colors, just like we had our 3 primary modes. But when you blend them, you get to integrate those ideas and you get to develop new colors that are richer and have more complexity and depth to them. So these text types are often blended together so that we have original writing. Common Core has stated that skilled writers need to blend these in order to accomplish their purpose. So why do we need to understand this as students? Why do we need to teach it? Because our students read, our students write. We need to do that as well. And we need to make sure that we are developing real-world writers. And if you look at a lot of the real-world writing that is put out there, a lot of it has narrative elements embedded into the argument. So by blending the text, we are blending the modes of discourse. So some background on the modes of discourse. This comes from Alexander Bain all the way back in 1866. He first introduced these 4 modes of discourse, which pretty much follows those modes and text types. The expository, also known as informative, narrative, descriptive, and argumentative. So descriptive is the one that we don't explicitly have within our standards. And he says that even though most compositions primarily deal with just one mode, the longer the piece of the writing, the more likely you will integrate more modes of discourse into the whole. And then he takes these 4 modes and he assigns verbs to them. So essentially, every time we write, our goal is to teach, to tell what happened, to describe, and prove. And that is our goal as a writer. That is our goal as a teacher. Now, I do want to show you from the sample prompt that you did as your pre-assessment what this looks like in the classroom. Because I gave you a real-world artifact that comes from grade 8, and that is not to belittle anybody or to be condescending. It's simply to show you a real-world artifact that 8th grade students were given and the standards of what they were expected to be able to do. I also chose this because it dealt with the Olympics, and since we are in the Olympic season, I knew that it would be a relevant, high-interest article. I enjoyed reading it and getting to know some of that background information. So looking at the prompt, it clearly delineates the mode as argument. It clearly states that students should give a claim and an opposing claim. And by providing the passage-based text that students have to read in order to write, that enables the critical thinking, which is standard 3 of the critical reading and writing. So by looking at the 8th grade standard argument, students should introduce a claim, check, and one from an opposing viewpoint, check, and use credible sources which were given to them. Students also need to show the relationships among the claim, the reasons, and the evidence, and include a conclusion that follows a logical form. So, if this is the real-world artifact and it has argumentative writing in it, that goes along with our standards. You also have the freedom to blend your narrative, or to inform and give background information about the Olympics in the writing. So I thought this was a great example to show the standards, the expectations of what students should know and be able to do while integrating those 4 modes of discourse. So that is a little bit of information about the Oklahoma academic standards. We also follow the National Council for Teachers of English standards. The first 2 deal with content knowledge, and especially Standard 2, which deals with language and writing. As teacher candidates or as writers, we need to know our subject matter. We need to know how to compose a range of formal and informal text. We need to know audience, context, and purpose. That's the rhetorical triangle. We need to engage in a recursive process, which is the writing process. We need to use technology. Check, we're doing that with this online course. And we need to be able to compose multimodal discourse, which is Standard 7, and that is simply visual literacy and showing our thinking through other means of expression. Element 2, we need to know rhetorical situations. We need to have our GUM, our grammar, usage, and mechanics. We need to understand dialect, grammar systems, language acquisition. We also need to recognize the influence of the history of English language and the impact of language on society. So everything we do in this course, as we are looking at these different text types, we also have to demonstrate our content knowledge as English and English education majors. All of those standards can be divided up into knowledge, understandings, and skills so that you will know these things, you will understand these things, and you will be skilled at these things. This is how I make standards-based assignments, and this is how I ensure that you are getting the knowledge, understanding, and skills to be an effective writer. So that is just a little bit of background information about the 5 kinds of composing and knowledge, and background information about our composition standards.